one of the things that I've witnessed, and when I'm in these rooms, such like Clubhouse, where they're talking about NFTs, is that artists really need to understand less about NFTs and less about NFTs as a concept, but more about what they provide. Mm-hmm. And so one of these things is ownership and authenticity. And I guess my question is, when you think about people collecting your work and you think about what that might look like, the beauty of your work is that people aren't necessarily just looking at it, right? They're, like you said, they're interacting with it. And so talk a little bit about how you create. What is a typical day of working on your art? Like this morning, I didn't think I got you up that early, but I didn't, because you said, you were just working out. So yeah, let us walk into Balam's studio and his life just for a few minutes. What's your day like, man?
Sure. Yeah, actually, good question. It actually, I personally believe that in order to generate good ideas or to execute good ideas, it is very necessary to have some sort of like a mind that is set to do that. In order to set the mind in that process, exercising, it really helps a lot, especially with working with in new works or in general. Exercising really motivates actually it promotes a state of thinking different. And mostly lately what I've been experiencing, going into nature, it really has an impact on thinking about life in general, and by consequence reflecting that into an artwork. I usually, the way that I work, it's I begin the process having an idea, and then I spend a little bit of time thinking about that idea. And I have some works that I've been thinking for a little while, but they haven't come into reality because I'm not ready for approach that idea or to develop that idea further. So when I realized at that stage, one of the things that I do is personally, I love to learn, not just from the technology itself, but from other areas. Like I have a fascination to learn about philosophy and science.
Yeah.
And so I spent a little bit of time in cultivating that knowledge, that questions that I have, and reviewing works of others, other artists, they work specifically in those questions. It doesn't necessarily has to be a visual artist for me, or anything like that. It can be like, for example, a musician that works with concepts about, let's say, like silence, or concepts like a big bang. In that sense, it makes me think different, and understand these questions that I have in a philosophical format, and bring that into an artwork. So it's basically the works lately, they've been formulated by questions. They have an origin in a philosophical realm, and then answer those questions by myself. And during that process, a sort of ideas start appearing like a pattern. And when I identify that pattern of ideas, it means that I have an understanding of that concept, and begin the fascination of exploring more. And the way that I explore that ideas is through creating artworks. Mm-hmm. That will be one of the models that I follow. But like I mentioned previously, like I don't have any specific recipe to do an artwork. They must go from point A to end up in point C. it's very fluid, and each each artwork, it has a process of learning and a process that at the end I benefit because at the end of finishing that artwork, I have learned from new ways of how to code, to think about different elements like light, like photons traveling into space, and it generates more in curiosity, and that curiosity sometimes brings me to elaborate a different artwork based on the previous one.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So talk to me about, another thing that I've learned that artists are facing, especially when you're dealing with galleries, right? So let's talk about galleries for a second. I consider myself, especially through this work with Black Tech Futures Media, I consider myself an artist advocate in many ways. For me and Jamil unfortunately is not able to be with us today, as I mentioned before, but basically being able to talk to people about these ideas, right? Talk to people about the creative economy, talk to folks about what's going on in the future of art, especially post 2020, post COVID-19, being able to discuss things like royalties, right? And this is where galleries, especially when we're talking about galleries or these big galleries like Christie's and Sotheby's, those guys were able to jump into the NFT space. And Christie's, for example, just auctioned Fewocious, who is an 18-year-old trans artist who is being compared in many ways to Picasso, whose work is being compared to Picasso's, but just auctioned off. And that auction closed, I think this past week. Fewocious made $2 million in auction proceeds from This Is My Life, which was the name of the work. And so looking at the smaller houses, right, the smaller galleries, trying to jump into this space, what I'm finding is if you're not spending your time, you can literally spend hours, work week hours, 40, 50, 60 or more hours a week absorbing content about NFTs. Why? And then, so this is a bigger question, and this is kind of like between me and you, like personal. Why work with a smaller group or an organization or company like Black Tech Futures Media, who's really wanting to absorb and is in these spaces talking about NFTs, listening, learning, versus a gallery? Why not work necessarily with a gallery is my question for you. Sure. Why me, not a gallery?
Yes, that's actually a very good question.
People are going to want to know that, right? Because this is, what I'm doing is a little bit different and very public with my company. But yeah, please.
Sure. Well, the question, it's a very good question. And it makes me think into previous questions that I had, which I think is part of the answer. It's at some point we realized that previous COVID-19, I'm using COVID-19 as a reference point because it's an event that happened. So we have a sense of a change in the culture and the way that we live and the way that we do things because of the pandemic. So previous COVID-19, it seems to me like things were pretty much settled in a way to do things. And we never were questioning that matter of doing things. We seems to be like that was the norm and there was to continue. But COVID-19 came along and it really, from 1 month to another, it make huge life changes in so many ways, not just the way that we live, but the way that we interact, the way that we do things. And open it up the space for communication, through the internet, which is another invention that has allowed the creation of NFTs and has pushed it forward. And the role of the internet is the communication and the transmission of ideas. And in that sense, having the new concept like NFTs, don't think it would probably work the way that it's working now if that concept would be developed, let's say, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because not many people have access to the internet like people have nowadays. So the fact that the terminology NFT it's widespread and the sense and the understanding of it, as long with the culture that comes along, it's spread very fast. It's because we have access to the internet again from your telephone or from pretty much any device that can connect to the internet. And by having that access, it provides us the sense of being transcend the concept of being local into like a global
Right. The world has gotten smaller in this way. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good way to put it. And so by that, it means that the conditions for this idea to grow are ideal. It's like putting a seed in the right soil. So this it's growing, and by that means it's that other individuals have understanding and knowledge of how this works and see the potential of it in a level that hasn't been in the past. Thanks again for the internet.
Yeah.
And by that, and this creates opportunities for individuals like yourself, where they see the potential of this and they see, in a way, in a futuristic format, the new approach of how artists think, how we work. And start questioning the sense of like, is it really necessary to have a gallery to sell an artwork?
Yeah.
Like, how is that possible that this hasn't been created in the past? Or like, why is the art scene so constricted to, in a way, to be exclusive to XY big names and art, XY big names galleries? And at the same time, there is an immense amount of very talented artists and individuals that, for whatever reason, they are not part of the radar of these big name galleries. So by opening it up, that new market, all these artists can go and become part of this of the art market using different tools that are more adapted to the culture nowadays. So that's what I think the innovation of a company like yours comes along and grabs that sense of innovation into the art market, which is something that has it's very necessary for an industry to grow. Like so many industries, they have adapted themselves to the progress of technology. Like for example, retail selling. They used to go to a store, but now you can go to the website and pretty much get everything delivered to your door next day.
Yeah.
So in that way, art it's approaching technology and it's opening new opportunities and those opportunities imply new strategies, new business models to come along, and it seems to me like the NFTs, it is not just like, for example, being developing created in San Francisco. It's outside that area, expands beyond, and that expansion is where it really needs, where it really generates a change in a market.
Yeah, it's true. NFTs are extremely expansive, and what's great about this concept too is that it's got. I was in a room last night and the artists were talking about, there was a gentleman who is a creative director for Google who was hosting the room, and the questions were awesome. And a lot of the discussion really focused on, how do we not worry about, so when we think about the NFT space within the past year,
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we've now made, and this is only what, half a year, we've made like over $2 billion. The industry has made over $2 billion. A lot of that money is going to the directly to the artist, and that's the beauty of it. But there are more things, right? So if galleries aren't talking about, right, and there's a place where I'm sort of like saying it's important for all of us to understand these other concepts rather than worrying about teaching people what is an NFT. And these other concepts are things like what the smart contract or NFT will actually allow, right? So what are the possibilities? When we talk about ownership, obviously ownership and having the creator who made the work be able to say, I made this, I did this, or I did this with the support or assistance of X, Y, and Z. And being able to say, this is what I did, this is mine. Putting that work on the blockchain now with a smart contract allows us to really be able to say, I can prove the authenticity. I can't take a video of your work and say, this is my work, I did this, because it can be proven that you are the owner and creator. So that's beautiful. The other things like licensing, huge issue, right? Being able to say, this is how I want my work to be utilized by the person with the highest bid, by the people who actually own it. That's huge for the artists to be able to do, because we're in a huge remix culture, right? And we're in a space where the platforms that exist, this was the other thing that was brought up, and I think this is beautiful. The platforms that exist like Facebook, which sadly is currently locking me out of the live. Fortunately, this video is being recorded. Episode 19 will be up on YouTube by the end of the day so folks can access it. But this is part of the challenge, right? Platforms that exist, if you really read the licensing, that want to own your content or do actually own your content. And the beauty of the smart contract, you being able to say, I own this content, potentially Web 3.0 being able to allow us to actually take the content across different platforms. These things are being developed right now. These new platforms are being developed, which put the creator in control. And that is the one thing that I love. And that is the beauty of how technology continues to be expansive, how future concepts continue to grow. We're in I would say, the wild, wild west of NFTs and what the platforms are able to do. And so a lot of this information and knowledge, as I'm learning, I'm just like, wow, we will be able to transfer and carry our content across various platforms and be in more creative control over how it's accessed, who is able to access it, and how to monetize it. And I think that is the most important piece, because we cannot be, I'm not sure how you fared through 2020 as an interactive artist. I'm sure your work has been at Real Artways, for example. You've done some gallery shows there. But just for a second, like how was 2020? This is coming from a working artist. I want to understand how COVID and how 2020 really impacted your ability to do work, share work, and monetize your work.
It's a very good question. But 2020 really, it's besides all the economical impact they brought down and show other cultural elements in that process. I think it really makes me thought about my work specifically because, like for example, during that time where, like in this case, transmission of a virus was through touch or through proximity, it made me think about like how to how to do works where they really individuals can really enjoy it from within the regulations that were in place by institutions and safety of the individuals, like social distancing, for example.
Yeah.
So it makes me think more about what's the sense of the individual and location, and how to make interaction with individuals where the sensor captures the location of the specific individual without this individual really touching or anything, but at the same time understanding that his presence or this presence is really affecting the artwork. So
Right.
in that sense, it really makes me think about how to reconsider all these new elements and apply it into artworks. And hopefully this pandemic won't repeat itself in the future. So it was a temporary solution to implement, but the fact that it made me rethink how individuals can interact, it made an impact in the creation of the artwork. And thinking about it. And yes, for almost a year, pretty much everything that was online, there wasn't really that much specific spaces for visual artists to present their work other than sharing on social media or things like that. But there wasn't the traditional way with you have a show and people come and they can see the show and they can experience by themselves the work. So in a way, it was more like a virtual proximity from the virtual presence of the individual to the virtual work presented. So it was they added a different layer into the experience of being in front of an artwork.
Right.
And I think that really makes a sense of how to think and execute artworks based on those concepts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, 2020 for you, and I know like we talked about, you really thinking is really a large percentage of the time that you spend. You spend a lot of time thinking about the work and thinking about how you're going to put the work together. And so in this way, in a sense, 2020 helped you think about your work in a very different way, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right on that.
Yeah. So that's cool. That's pretty interesting. So Balam, I just want to welcome you aboard, man. And I cannot wait to see the product, and we're going to document the process. I think that's very important. People want to, collectors want a story. And I think that when we're thinking about, again, as my focus, Web3, but also storytelling is so huge and so important. People want to understand and hear and feel the emotion behind the creations. And so I'm really excited based on what I actually already saw and based on how you think about the work and the fact that you're like always working.
Thank you.
Right. And well, I know this is true, right? You're literally always working, which is so awesome and cool. And I'm looking forward to coming by the studio and just hanging out for a sec, not to disturb the process, but just to sort of capture some of it and share it with the world as you're developing your NFT. And I think that helps people to understand who you are, the work that you're creating, and how important it is that not only people are able to interact with it, but people are able to experience your work. And that's one reason why I'm so excited to imagine what the possibilities are once this NFT is complete.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right on that. And yes. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask one last thing. I was going to ask you that I think is important that you brought up, and something that you and I have discussed in the past: the issue of minimalism, the issue of working with the tools that you have. Talk a little bit maybe about that concept, because I think that one of the things we were talking about a couple years ago was simply how these spaces show up in a community, and how there are these spaces where young people are expected to simply, it's sort of like if you build it, they will come. Right. So you have these very expensive, you have these spaces with incredible equipment, incredible resources, brand new computers and software, people potentially also who are instructing young people. But one of the things that you said that has truly stuck with me is that, and I'm going to be sort of changing it, ad-libbing it a little bit, but the idea was that when you have access to all the stuff, it really doesn't help the creativity, right? It doesn't help with the creativity because you're not forced to think about it. You're not forced to imagine how to use what you have in order to create. And so maybe talk a little bit about your approach and how important minimalism and some of these other ideas are to the creations that you make.
I personally think that resourcefulness, it's a very intrinsic element into creativity. By that, what I mean is that having like you don't really have to have an expensive lab or an expensive tools or every single tool that you need to create an artwork.
Right.
Using understanding the process and understanding what the artwork is going to need, and then looking at what you have and then modifying the process of getting to where you want to go using what you have. It's really enrichment in my life as well. The reflection from creating artwork into the way that I do things, and that connectivity, it is back, put back into my life, the way that I do things, and by consequence, my tendency to work with the minimum tools, or to be very to understand what I have and to explore the potential of it. It can be reflected back into an artwork when you have an artwork and then you step away from it and then you see that this artwork has more potential than what you saw in the moment that you were working on it. So, and I also noticed that the simple ideas are usually the greatest ideas, the ones that rely on simplicity. And it is something that really captivates my interest in, and I love the concept of minimalism, because it really means that you really can use what you have and be pretty much dependent on yourself and your skills, rather than being dependent on an external element as a tool that does the specific things, or that have a complex set of equipment just to cut a piece of wood when you can just use a saw.
Right. I like that you said you depend on your own skills, and I think that I think that's important, right? Wherever you're at, but also learning things too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's I think that 2020 taught us that too, right? We were able to look around our homes because we couldn't really go anywhere. We were able to look around our homes and consider our passions. Some people call this the passion economy, 2021, because it's a result of people just trying things out, because a lot of folks didn't have money. A lot of folks lost their jobs. A lot of folks had their own skills, and perhaps even I ran into a woman in Best Buy who was looking to purchase equipment to start a podcast where she's doing yoga. And she's like, I've never done this before. Can I just follow you around? And as you're talking to the customer service person, because you sound like what you're talking about. And it was like, I was talking to her and just encouraging her to just do what she wanted to do, just try it out. because that's where we were last year, right? Trying things out, the opportunity to do so, and almost forced to put our ideas in motion.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that is very interesting. Like, I personally think the great ideas are incredible when they are executed.
Yeah.
So having the idea, it's the beginning, and the execution is the other half of it.
Yeah, execution's huge. Jamil and I were talking about last week how this is episode 19. So, being able to do something consistently, that we've been doing this since the 3rd of March of this year. And I know that because it was the first Wednesday of the month. And there are different points that people on Clubhouse who are talking about NFTs, there are different points that people are discussing, points in time, where if you got involved with NFTs prior to February, for example, or around December of 2019, that you obviously potentially are much further along in a different sort of space related to NFTs, in a different space in your knowledge. The people who got in, like myself, in March, now have 6 months of understanding NFTs and what the community is doing. And obviously, we've all been experiencing, even if we don't know what this concept is, NFTs, we've heard about it maybe because of Saturday Night Live and the skit that they did, right, several months ago. Or you've heard about more recently people like Jay-Z, who's dropped an NFT, and some of the issues around him and Damon Dash, some of those, issues that they were having, the controversy around it. And then even other artists and creative people who are very famous who are doing this left and right. So the big corporations have jumped in and started creating a fan base, if they already have one, obviously, looking at their fans in different particular areas, working with artists, making NFTs, just so that they can also share incredible work and ideas. So if you've gotten in at the beginning of the year, you kind of have a good understanding of sort of how people are jumping in. And it's like the wild, wild west almost. When I think about it, I think about, because a lot of younger folks, if you're a particular age, you don't remember, I would call it BTI, right? Before the internet. Or you, right? Or you remember the beginnings of the internet when things were really clunky, when platforms were being created. You remember Amazon before it was Amazon, right?
Yeah.
So this is an interesting time to be involved in this conversation. And I'm excited because it's sort of like, I'm wondering, what is Black Tech Futures Media going to turn into? And the beauty is I just love the idea of creating and doing this in a very public way, building this company, building the brand, and working with artists like yourself who are doing innovative and creative ways and doing those things in a very different way. So I appreciate it, Balam, and I'm excited about what the potential is, man. And so one of the things we're looking at the next several months, like the next couple of months, really working on the idea and pulling together the concept and building it. And then in the last month, really big push, making sure that folks know the auction is coming and doing, as Jamil would say, a drip campaign to ensure that the collectors are aware and that some of the hosts in some of these rooms are aware of the work that you're doing. And so I just want to, again, thank you. And I'm excited to work with you. And I'm looking forward to not only the end result, but obviously the process, man.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, thank you very much for the interview.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. This is Black Tech Futures Media Weekly Chat, episode 19. Can't wait to show you all the amazing work that we're doing. Follow us every week maybe Facebook Live, maybe not in the future. We're looking at different platforms as well, ways to get our lives out. But then also, Facebook shut me out this morning. Not sure what's going on with that. Check us out. This episode will be on today, nftcreativetraders.com. Check it out, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Balam, thanks again, man. And peace.
Thank you very much.